Good evening and welcome to our Yes Prep families and friends. We are so happy you've taken time out to join us tonight for our family workshop series with Dr. Crystal Collier. Jonathan, if you could please translate for us before we hand it over to Crystal.
Hola, buenas tardes. Bienvenidos a el taller de Dr. Collier. Estamos muy agradecidos por atender en esta tarde y esperemos que aprendamos todos juntos un poco más sobre el cerebro y lo que estaremos hablando hoy.
All right.
Okay, ahora estaremos presentando a Dr. Collier. Now we'll be presenting Dr. Collier.
Thank you. We've got subtitles working. It all looks great. Greetings, Yes Prep. Thank you for attending the presentation tonight. This is entitled Brainabouts About Stress. I've got a repeat that keeps happening. As many of you know, I study the adolescent brain for a living, specifically to find out what is the most helpful thing a parent or a clinician can do while their child's brain is growing and developing. What I've learned is that it's this very specific part of the brain right here in front that is critical as we grow and develop. This is known as our frontal.
Dr. Collier, I hate to interrupt, but you are muted.
I keep hearing the thing that I just said repeated. Is that what is supposed to happen?
No, I don't believe so. We'll just make sure everyone is on mute and hopefully you should be good to go.
Okay.
Do you want to try and restart there?
Are you hearing that, by the way?
We are not hearing that.
Okay.
I am not hearing that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. We start from here. We're going to talk about stress tonight. In this past year, many of us have felt more stress than we would have liked. But it's important to remember that the stress kids feel is a little different than the stress adults feel. Here are the top 5 stressors that stress adults out the most: money, work, performance, bereavement, which is the stress that occurs when we lose someone or something that we love, and personal issues, like for instance, fun things, good things like getting married are really stressful. For teens, the top 5 stressors. Number 1, family problems, school, friends, body image issues, and romantic relationships. One of the things that I want you to do is write down the top 5 things that you stress the most about. And then I want you to ask your kids, what are their top 5 stressors? And notice the difference. Please remember, teens stress about what's going on in the family, although a lot of times they don't show it in the normal ways that we think they might. So here are some things that I hear from my clients that I work with. A lot of adolescents tell me that they get stressed over loss, the loss of family, the loss of friends, or when they get a new baby brother or sister, if their parents are going through divorce or separation, if they're having to move or change schools. Change in their family's financial state, which we've seen more and more stress being caused by this issue this past year than normal. Relationships, brand new ones, the end of school, the start of school, moving to a new house, or falling behind in school. All of these things can be stressors for our teens. Let's talk about the stress response so that you understand what's happening. Now, it's important to remember that stress happens deep inside of our brain in a place known as the limbic system. Now, our frontal lobe is the part of the brain that is the thinking part, the part that's growing and developing as our kids grow. But when we are stressed, it's almost like we have a temperature gauge inside of our brain. When we are not stressed, calm, cool, and collected, our temperature gauge is in this very low or low area, the green area. When our temperature gauge is in that setting, our central nervous system is calm and relaxed. But our limbic system is a very old part of the brain, back to caveman days. If you think about a caveman as they're hunting in the forest, they're on moderate alert. They're hungry, they're looking around for something to eat, and all of a sudden, a big saber-toothed tiger comes out of the woods. All of a sudden, their limbic system moved into the high, or most likely, the very high red zone. Immediately, the limbic system tells the amygdala, right here. The amygdala is the switch that turns the limbic system on. The amygdala says, danger, danger. It tells the pituitary gland to send adrenaline throughout your body, rushing blood to your hands, to your feet, and to your eyes, moving the blood flow away from your frontal lobe into your limbic system to get you ready to fight, flight, or freeze. It does this when a split second, our caveman is able to get away. But what also happens during that high to very high stress response is it dumps all that data into the hippocampus. This is a part of the brain that encodes memories. Now, this makes a lot of sense. We need to remember that place in the forest so we never walk by there again. But remember, back in caveman days, there was no GPS. There was no map. We had to remember those things from our own memory. This is why the limbic system dumps all the data into our hippocampus, and it still works that way today, which is unfortunately why we remember bad memories a lot sharper and clearer than the good memories. Now, the scary thing about this stress response is that it turns the frontal lobe off. Now, in the moment, we don't need the frontal lobe to make decisions and have empathy and to critically think. We just need our limbic system to be on. But this limbic system, this stress response, is all about perceived threats. This is the key thing to remember about the stress response. If you perceive something to be a stressor, it will turn the limbic system on, putting you into fight or flight mode. I'll give you an example. When I was younger, my mother and I had a very tumultuous relationship. When I moved away, this was right about the time that they assigned different ringtones to people. I assigned the angry cat sound to my mother. Whenever my mother would call me, I would hear angry cat noise. Immediately, my limbic system would turn into the red. Blood would move away from my frontal lobe into my fight or flight response. But instead of fighting or fleeing, I just froze. I had a very good therapist who said to me, "Now, Crystal, your mom lives 1,000 miles away. You're safe. Stop perceiving her as a threat, and your limbic system won't turn on." So I started doing deep breathing exercises. I put a different spa ringtone on my phone. And after a while, I trained my limbic system to stay in the green, sometimes the yellow zone, when my mom called. So remember, your perceptions have a lot to do with how much you perceive stress. Keeping the frontal lobe on when you're stressed is key, because it's the frontal lobe that can tell your limbic system everything's okay. This is just temporary. This too shall pass. I like to teach this stress response to my clients, and I ask them, what color is your stress? Are you green, light green, yellow, orange, or red? They know what they need to do to move themselves into a lower state by turning back on the frontal lobe so that it can talk to this limbic system and tell it to calm down, everything's going to be okay. All right, let's take a look at why stress is good for us. I don't know about you, but I like a certain level of stress. If you give me a deadline, I'm actually able to get things done. If I don't have a deadline, sometimes I will procrastinate. So if you look at this chart, you can see as stress, the pressure goes up. Well, when we don't have a lot of pressure, we're pretty bored. But as the pressure or the stress goes up, so does our performance. We get to this level up here where the stress, the pressure is pretty high, but not too high. You're in this optimal level of stress. We perform really well here. We don't want to be completely stress-free because then we're going to be bored. But if our stress level gets higher and higher and higher. If the pressure is greater and greater, you can see it can have a negative effect on our performance. With high stress comes anxiety and unhappiness. It is important to teach this to your kids to help them identify when their stress moves out of this optimal area of best performance. And then make sure that they learn some self-care strategies to move them back. So I think that if you've ever heard me speak, you know that I study high-risk behavior, specifically high-risk behavior in teenagers, but also adults. So it started when I started reading information about addiction from drugs and alcohol. But then I started to read brain studies that showed technology addiction, self-injury, eating disorders. They all have a very similar effect on the brain. And in many ways, this is good news. Because as a parent, if you focus on making sure your child's frontal lobe develops normally, then you will have a child who's got good frontal lobe skills. And if you make sure that you let them know no drugs, no alcohol, and everything in moderation, and I expect you to take good care of your mental health, then you will see a reduction in high-risk behavior. So let me show you one of my favorite brain studies that really illustrates the effect of stress. Stress increases cortisol. Cortisol is known as the stress hormone. Cortisol is very important to us because when we're stressed, we can't really be all calm and happy all the time, which is what dopamine does for us. And so what cortisol does is it dampens the effect of dopamine. It cuts it in half. And so when we're stressed, what we see is a brain that is high in cortisol, which cuts dopamine levels. But when you cut dopamine levels, you start to crave dopamine. If you used marijuana when you were stressed, you will crave marijuana more. If you used food when you're stressed, you'll crave food more. If you used relationships, healthy or unhealthy, you may crave them more. This is a brain study that illustrates somebody who is stressed. Excuse me. Notice there is activity in the limbic system. That temperature gauge is on red. There's a little bit of activity in other parts of the brain that this person is using, but their frontal lobe is off. They are in fight or flight, all or nothing thinking, just like I was when my mom called, or when cavemen are faced with a life-threatening animal. Now, this is a brain down here of somebody who is not stressed. The stressor is gone. What you see is the limbic system is calmed down. That temperature gauge has moved back into the green. And the frontal lobe is back on, allowing you to think, act, have empathy, and make better decisions. But this is why, when we're stressed, sometimes we crave bad things, like high-calorie, sugar-dense foods. Whenever I get stressed, I'll call my husband and say, "Honey, can we have Papa's Burgers for dinner?" And he giggles and says, "Aw, did you have a bad day?" He knows my comfort food, what I crave, is carb-filled cheeseburgers. Now, I also crave him and that relationship because he is a healthy tool for me to use when I'm stressed. Now, it's important to remember that sometimes we can use unhealthy things in moderation, like those cheeseburgers, but we want to teach our kids to have a balance of really healthy coping skills when they're stressed, and also teach them the relationship between stress and cravings. We want to make sure that they don't use sugar-dense, high-calorie foods for stress reduction. That can increase their body weight, their chance for diabetes, and it is not the healthiest way to cope. We want to give them better skills. So it's important to remember, stress happens, we get triggered because we have feelings that we want to change. Our dopamine may be cut in half as cortisol increases. Then we get cravings. And this is when we engage in risky behavior. At what point in this whole process can we intervene? Yep, anytime. We can self-care when we're stressed, notice when we get triggered, ask ourselves what negative feelings we want to change, and why we are craving what we're craving. And instead of engaging in the risky behavior, which would be engaging in sugar-dense, high-calorie foods, maybe we do something different, like ask our friend to go for a walk. So this brings us to how we cope. I want you to ask the question of yourself. How do you deal with stress? Are you this person who's on the computer all hours of the day, mainlining caffeine? Do you deal by over-functioning, under-functioning, coping, or coping? Let's talk about that. There are two types of coping mechanisms that we can use when we are stressed. The first one is called avoidant coping. This occurs when we are feeling overwhelmed, and changing the way we feel by avoiding the feeling is called copping out. My favorite way to cop out is by binge watching a whole show on Netflix over the weekend. You guys all know it is absolutely appropriate to cop out sometimes, to just turn on the TV and try to forget about the problems of the day. Nothing wrong with doing that in balance. But we also want to make sure we balance out avoidant coping with active coping. Active coping occurs when we face problems, find solutions, even when it is difficult and it doesn't feel good. So my favorite active coping is hot yoga. My studio was closed for about 9 months, but they gave me some options to do it online at home. Every time I go do yoga, it clears my mind, I'm allowed to meditate and focus, and I can brainstorm solutions with every single pose I'm in. That's why I really enjoy yoga. It's probably the only exercise I enjoy, but it is my way of actively coping. What is your pattern? Are you an active coper, an avoidant coper, or do you balance them out? Or has the stress of the pandemic caused you to be more of one or the other? Now, at the family dinner table, I want you to ask your family members, what is their percentage of active versus avoidant coping? Go around the dinner table and ask everybody to admit, do they like to cop out or cope, or a mix of the two? Then you can start talking to them about the dangers of avoidant coping. I study addiction, and I've noticed when people stop using drugs and alcohol, they can switch to another addiction. And so this is when avoidant coping leads to more risky behavior, stopping one to just pick up another. So what other behaviors do people sometimes switch to? I have watched people stop drinking and start eating more, stop doing drugs but get into unhealthy relationships, stop actively hanging around their friends because they're on technology too much, and isolating with TV more often. Ask your family members, has what has happened to us in this past year caused more avoidant coping? And brainstorm new solutions to move out of that habit and add a little bit of active coping to the mix. Now, here's another question that I want to pose to you and have you pose to your kids. What are your red flags? Everybody has different red flags that let us know our stress levels are way too high. So for me, when I do too much, when I say yes to too many things, and then I run myself ragged trying to get it all done. When I start to get sick because my immune system is suffering, that's a red flag that I need to slow down. Your red flags may look like something like these. Do you get into denial? Oh, no, that's not happening. I'm fine. Everything's okay. Do you start switching addictions? Are you eating more? Are you watching more TV? Playing more video games? Is your personal appearance or your hygiene suffering? Are you getting lazy and stopping your homework or meeting less goals? Do you get panicked or anxious? Do you start breaking rules or acting out? Or do you start shutting down? Here are some other red flags and warning signs that your stress level or your children's stress level may be too high. Exhaustion, dishonesty. When we get irritable or impatient, that's my husband's red flag. He's normally so patient. When I see him lose his cool, I know he's stressed. Sometimes people get depressed or sad when they get too stressed. Start to move into self-pity. Poor me, poor me. Pour me a drink. Sometimes people get complacent or lazy and they let things go that they shouldn't. Sometimes when we get too stressed, we expect too much from the people around us. And we let up on our disciplines, like we stop eating healthy or we stop exercising. Maybe we pick up mood-altering chemicals. Maybe we start drinking too much or using something that we shouldn't. Maybe you just forget being grateful because you're so focused on what's stressing you out. And this is a big one. This is one that I fall into. I think I can do it all on my own, and I forget to ask for help. Now let's talk about some active coping mechanisms that I want to make sure you do with your kids and for yourself. The first thing is, how emotionally literate are you? What that means is how well can you identify and talk about your emotions? If you're anything like my husband, who says, "Oh, you hurt my feeling," because he only has one. That means you're probably not very emotionally literate. It is critical to teach kids how to read their own emotions and read other people's. The human body can feel over 100 different emotions. I was so curious as to why. Why has the human evolved to feel this many emotions? The answer to that is our population has grown larger and larger and larger. With a tribe this big, we have to be able to read more and more and subtle emotional states in order to survive in the world. However, what is critical to remember about this is that all of us experience a wide range of emotions, including our pets and our animals. I know, look at this guy down here at the bottom. Doesn't he look like he's having the worst day ever? And don't get me started on pugs. I think they always look sad. But remember, feelings are not facts. They are just information. So the way that you approach kids is you say, "Tell me how you're feeling." Now, what does this feeling mean? It's not a fact. It's just giving you information, telling you what you need to do next. So make sure that they know how to first identify their feelings. And here is one of my favorite tools. The word Kimochi is Japanese for the word feeling. And I have a bowl of Kimochis in my office that I use for young kids. Early childhood, elementary, and some of my middle schoolers love my Kimochis. I have an 8-year-old who comes into my office and he pours out the bowl of Kimochis and picks out 5 or 10 and tells me how he feels. These also come in Spanish. Now, if you have an older child, you may want to use a feeling wheel. My favorite way to describe feelings is with the wheel that looks like a color wheel. Primary emotions are in the middle. So you pick which emotion that you might feel the most relatable to, and then you work your way out from there, refining the emotion. This is a great way to teach emotional literacy. And when your teenager says, "I don't know what I feel," hand them the feeling wheel. Every time I've ever handed one of these to a teenager, they love it. They name 5, 6, sometimes 7 different emotions. The next question after that is, what information are these emotions trying to tell you? What should you do with this emotional information? Now, the next skill is to learn when we have automatic negative thoughts. And there are 4 categories. So I want you to see if you identify with any of these. The first one is, I think this is our, can't see that. I think that's the, this is the victim. Oh, I have to get my book. I can't see my slide really quick. Let me take this out. There we go. Worry. There we go. Worry, critic, and victim. The first ant here is the worry ant. An ant is an automatic negative thought, which means we have a thought over and over and over again until it becomes automatic. This means we're developing long strings of neuronal connections for this thought. If you are a worry ant, your thoughts may sound like, oh my God, I can't believe this is going to happen. Well, what if that is going on? And that could be a catastrophe. Everything's going to be terrible. Those kind of thoughts are known as the worry ant. We have our critic ant. If you have automatic critical thinking, your ant might sound like this. Oh, I can't believe they're doing that. What's going on? I think she's an idiot. Oh, they never let me do this. We're never going to be able to win. This kind of automatic thinking, very critical, can put you in a bad mood quick. The worry ant can put you in an anxious, fearful, worry mood. The critic ant can put you in a frustrated, irritable, angry mood. Maybe you have the victim ant. The victim ant sounds like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm so bad at that. I don't know how to do it. It'll be impossible. The victim ant can work themselves into a very sad, depressed state. Now, this last one is the one that I am most guilty of, the perfectionist ant. This ant says, oh, I have to do everything right. I have to make all A's. I have to do all this on time. I've got to get everything done. The world will fall apart if I don't do this. The weight is on my shoulders. The perfectionist ant has the worst physical symptoms: stress, tension, shoulders, migraine headaches, stomach aches. Automatic negative thinking is not healthy for us. We want to learn how to have better, more flexible thinking. So if you hear yourself using an ant, stop yourself and reframe it. When I hear myself say I have to get everything done, I stop myself and say, no, Crystal, you just have to get as much as you can get done. I take a deep breath and I feel the stress leaving my body. Ask your children to identify which ant they are most guilty of using in their thinking. And when you hear your children use these, reframe it for them, or ask them to reframe it. Now, when you know how you feel and you can identify what thinking is related to your feeling, then you can move into the behavior that you need to engage in for self-care. And here is an acronym that can help you remember. HALTs. HALT stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and stressed. When you are feeling stressed, halt and ask yourself, do I need to eat? Do I need to take a time out? Do I need to connect and call someone? Do I need to rest and take a nap? Or do I need to use a self-care strategy for stress? Take care of what your body needs first. Then work on your thoughts, and the feelings will change naturally. The next thing I want you to cultivate in yourself and in your children's thinking is the language of self-compassion. Imagine if you looked into the mirror every day and did this to yourself. Gave yourself a big hug. Appreciated all the parts of yourself non-judgmentally. and accepted yourself for the good and the bad. I used to beat myself up all the time because of my perfectionistic aunt. I used to crater when I made a mistake. Now I have a new mantra. That mantra is, Crystal, it's okay to make mistakes. You are perfect because you make mistakes. Now go make more mistakes and let it go. As soon as I say that mantra, I can feel my shoulders drop and my stress starting to leave. So what I want you to do is to ask yourself, what does your self-talk look like? I asked a group of 3rd and 4th graders to tell me what their self-talk sounded like, and here's what they said. They said things like, I hate myself. She's an idiot. I'm too fat. I can't do it. Life's terrible. Ugh, I'll never be able to know how to do math. I'm stupid. I want you to ask yourself, what does your self-talk sound like? Write it all down. And then I want you to ask your children, what does their self-talk sound like? You might hate to hear that sometimes their self-talk sounds a little bit like your self-talk. And then I want you to think of ways to turn that around. How can you speak more positively toward yourself? And how can you speak more positively toward your kids? Remember, humans need a positive to negative ratio of 5 to 1. We need to hear 5 positive things for every 1 negative thing. So if you have a lot of negative self-talk, I want you to work on increasing your positive self-talk and saying things to yourself that are healthy, non-judgmental, self-soothing, especially when you're feeling stressed. And here are some behaviors to engage in. Walking, working out, coming to see your counselor. There are some amazing counselors at all the Yes Prep schools that have been working their tails off this year to help you and your kiddos make it through not just school, but through a pandemic. Counting to 10, using a punching bag or a pillow. I don't know about you guys, but when I clean, oh my gosh, when I was younger, I'd get angry and I'd clean my whole kitchen floor on my hands and knees. I noticed that older that I got and the better anger management skills, my house got dirtier. If you're a journal writer, do that. If you like to meditate, try that. I'm going to teach you a grounding exercise to use with deep breathing. So what I'd like you to do is to get into a comfortable position and imagine your lungs. Fill up the thickest part of your lungs, which are at the very, very bottom. Take a deep breath. Try to make sure you get air all the way down, inflating the thickest part of your lungs. And slowly breathe out. Now, I want you to ground your 5 senses. Take a big deep breath and slowly look around the room. And I want you to silently say to yourself 5 things that you can see. Take another deep breath. And on a slow exhale, close your eyes and silently name 4 things you can hear. On the next deep breath, Exhale and silently name 3 things you can feel. Take a deep breath. And on the exhale, silently name 2 things you can smell. One last inhale. Silently name 1 thing you can taste. Breathe in deeply. Exhale slowly and open your eyes. You have just grounded your 5 senses. When you ground your body, you stop worrying for a moment, see, hear, feel, smell, and taste. That exercise can turn your limbic system off, letting you know that you're safe, and allows your frontal lobe to perceive the things in your life that are causing stress in a different way. If you're having trouble solving a problem, pause and do a 5-minute grounding exercise. Teach this to your kids. The little ones love it. The older ones do too, even though they won't admit it. And remember, you need to take good care of your central nervous system, keeping your cortisol low, your frontal lobe on, so that it can perceive stress differently and function in a healthy way. So to remember, ask your teens and your kids what they're feeling stressed about, what their self-talk sounds like, how they're feeling, and what those feelings mean. And then ask them to change automatic negative thinking into something that makes them feel better. Teach them how to have control over their central nervous system. And these self-care skills will grow with them as their frontal lobe does. So I wrote a book called The Neuro Whereabouts Guide, and it just came out in Spanish. Guía de la Neurolocalización. You can purchase these on Amazon, but every time you come to one of my presentations over the next 4 weeks, your name will be entered into a drawing for a free Neuro Whereabouts Guide in either English or Spanish. My phone number and my websites are at the bottom. But now I'd like to open it up to take any questions that you guys may have about your stress or your kiddos' stress.
And feel free, this
Should
is
I
one of,
shut my screen off?
just, you can leave the screen up, Dr. Collier. Thank you so much for sharing your presentation. We're not sure if the question and answer session, if you could mute yours, Dr. Collier. If you mute for just a second, we won't get the feedback. We're not sure if the question and answer in the chat function, we enabled it, but we weren't sure if it was functioning. So if you do have questions for Dr. Collier, I sent an email today to remind you for the session tonight to everyone who had registered. I would ask that you please consider sending those questions to me. Just send to me, and I will make sure that Dr. Collier gets those questions and we get those answers for you. Jonathan, do you mind translating that for us for a moment, please, to be sure folks can get any questions they might have answered?
Yes. Si algún padre de familia tiene preguntas, por favor, manden un mensaje de correo electrónico a Miss Campbell y ella estará dando las preguntas hacia Dr. Collier y así podemos responder a sus preguntas, porque en este evento no pudimos hacer las preguntas.
Well, when I'm muted, I can't hear you guys. So I'm going to unmute real quick so I can hear what's going on, and then you can give me direction, Mark.
Dr. Collier, do you have anything else to say? I think if we have nothing else to say, then we can close out the event here. I don't know if Barb has anything else to add.
Oops.
No, I'm just so happy to be with you guys tonight. And if you guys need anything or you have questions about kids or cases, please feel free to email me and I'll answer.
Okay. I think I can close it out on behalf of Barb. She seems to be having technical difficulties. Thank you everyone for attending the live event with Dr. Collier. I'm glad you guys were able to attend and learn something new about the brain and stress. We hope to see you next Tuesday or the Tuesday after that, since there's spring break next week, to talk more about the brain. Gracias a las familias que atendieron a este evento. Es un placer tenerlos todos reunidos y poder aprender un poco más sobre el cerebro y el estrés. Los esperamos en las siguientes talleres con Dr. Collier que tendremos en 2 semanas, porque la semana que viene será Spring Break. So no tendremos un evento en ese día, sino hasta el 23 de marzo. Los esperamos ver el 23 de marzo. Una vez más, gracias por atender y pasen buenas noches.